Hey everybody, it's Norm from Tested.
And it's Jeremy from Tested.
Welcome to the third episode of Projections, our show about virtual reality, augmented reality, and all the interesting technologies that are going to put us in crazy virtual spaces.
I love the future, Norm.
You know, one of the problems of the technologies today, especially virtual reality, is getting around. Literally.
Locomotion.
Locomotion.
Yeah. My favorite topic, really.
It really is, because it's something that no one has solved yet.
No, like when we had first-person shooters, WASD became the standard, right? Everyone, that's what you go to when you play an FPS, and everyone expects it, everyone knows how to use it. On the gamepad, you have the left stick, and the right stick would spin you around. But we have so many different ways to move throughout the world in VR, and I feel like we haven't narrowed down what the favorite is yet. Or, like, is there a favorite? Because some people love some kinds and some people love another. And it all comes down to what makes you sick and what makes you feel immersed.
I think you got right to the point of it. The comfort is the thing that's been getting in the way of solving the problem.
Yeah.
If we were wearing the headsets and we were immersed and we felt body presence in the virtual space and a joypad stick worked fine without getting sick, I don't think people would complain. But now we have room scale VR, the ability to actually walk around your virtual space, more points of your body being tracked. There's also a higher level expectation for moving around the virtual space.
Well, room scale is probably the safest way to do it because that is just natural motion. I mean, that's what the Vive had going for it in 2016 it was room scale.
Yeah.
And if you had that installed in your house and you had enough space for it, you could actually walk around. And that's why Job Simulator, I think, is such a successful app. Because it employed actual room scale movement and it scaled according to how big your space was. It's all these other games that are experimenting with teleportation or gliding or, you know, all different types of variations of those two themes that are really still trying to figure out what works best for the largest possible number of people.
And the expectation that we have, because we've played games on the PC space where we are in expansive world, whether it's a first-person shooter or a third-person action game, in VR, we want to be able to also play in those expansive worlds bigger than just the room we have set up.
That's right.
For VR.
But on a traditional game like that, the movement mechanic really is just a mechanic. It's not about motion sickness.
There's abstraction, layers of abstraction for all that. You're pressing a button as opposed to firing a gun.
It's what
You're
accomplishes
moving a mouse as opposed to looking around.
It's what accomplishes that goal fastest and most intuitively. It's not about creating a sense of discomfort or avoiding that. You know, that's what we have to do now in games.
It's a really good point. It's about accomplishing a goal for fast responsiveness. WASD worked not because it was the most natural thing, but because our fingers are really responsive and those keys are close together, and that's a D-pad. But that's logically not how you would walk around at all. There's no reason why it couldn't be mouse wheel.
The dissonance in VR for me is I want the most intense immersion possible, but I don't want to feel sick getting there. And it's trying to balance those two parts of the equation that I think is the real problem. Like that's where designers struggle. Because it's easy to let somebody go into VR and spin around the camera or, you know, put them in some sort of like gyro thing that would essentially make them feel so immersed in that space that they want to throw up. Or, you know, play it safe and only do teleporting. Like that's the most safe approach.
So let's talk about some of the experiences in games that have been experimenting with locomotion and what ones we like. One example of a game I think that does locomotion pretty well is Budget Cuts for Steam VR and HTC Vive, and that uses portals.
Right.
And it's a form of teleportation, but it's built into the logic of the game.
For those that haven't played it, using the Vive controller, for instance, you tap, I believe it's a touchpad, to eject a ball that flies like a physics object into the world. And then that opens up a little portal where you are standing to that space. And then you can enter that portal, not by physically pulling this over, by pressing a button. It then envelops you, and you teleport there on command.
So that enveloping takes the place of that animation of the instantaneous teleport, and then applies a logic of the game world to your virtual space, so it's believable.
And I do like it. What they do really successfully is they create a fiction within which that actually plays out. Like, it's not just pointing and I'm just blinking or teleporting to that space because it's a movement mechanic. It's because I have this science fiction tool in my hand that ejects this blue ball that allows me to peer into that space and then go there myself.
And by seeing the physical blue ball fly away from your science fiction tool, logically, your brain better understands where you're going to be landing when you teleport. So it's not just a blink and where am I oriented? Well, you're oriented where you saw the ball go, and it enveloped around you from that perspective.
Right. Mechanic that doesn't work for me is the straightforward, the old school, like what we did with Rift for the first year, which is analog stick movement. When we first got the DK1, we played TF2. And for whatever reason, Will is a freak of nature. He did not get motion stick play in that game. A lot of people didn't, but a lot of people did, like myself. That does not work for me.
And it seems like a lot of developers are compensating for that, have learned that things that they can do to help and still have linear movement is to stagger the rotational movement, is to have it snap into 30-degree angles, left and right, or to have your no head bob when you actually are moving forward and back. Those things help, but they're not as smooth or believable or as what we're accustomed to in just regular 2D gaming.
There's not just the smooth movement forward with an analog stick. There's also people that have tried measuring your actual movement gait. Like I've played tests where you hold the controllers here and you just run. Like you start to move, and they just use that movement to detect that you're moving forward, and then you actually go in the direction that you're looking. And I have to admit, there's something to that. It's interesting. It's not quite as motion sickness inducing. But then, go ahead.
One of the more successful experiments in locomotion is in games like Climby or Lone Echo, where you have lateral movement and you're controlling not with your feet, but with your hands. One-to-one movement with your hands, even in the climb. But then, with your understanding of physics, you can actually propel yourself and use momentum to move through the virtual environment.
Yeah, I think the one-to-one aspect is crucial there, as is the lockdown rotation. So that in order to turn around, you actually physically have to turn around. Perhaps snap rotation would work in that case. In the sports bar game that we've played, what's the name of that? Do you remember?
VR Sports Bar.
Okay, VR Sports Bar. There's a Hulk thing that you can do to the world, isn't that right? Where you can grab it and then you can rotate it around. What they do in that case is there is rotational control, but they leave an augmented layer of like projected pattern of balls that remain consistent with the current perspective.
Right.
That you need a visual to understand what I'm talking about. But they realized that Hulk rotation,
which is still a
was
form
dicey.
of pulling and climbing around the world and pulling the world around you, but having an overlay, a grid overlay essentially.
Until you let go.
Until you let go, distracts your brain from realizing that everything's changing. It gives you a sense of orientation.
It gives you a sense of being stable. It gives you a sense of staying in the same place, which reduces the motion sickness.
Well, one game that we played recently at GDC is experimenting with not one, not two, not three, but 4 different forms of locomotion combined into a single game. It's from Survios, the makers of Raw Data, and this game is called Sprint Vector. It's a multiplayer racing game. We chatted with the core designer of the game to learn about it, and also got a demo, and so let's jump to that segment.
So Sprint Vector is an adrenaline platformer where you race at incredibly high speeds through a zany course in an interstellar game show that is called Sprint Vector. The entire point of Sprint Vector is to go really, really fast. It utilizes our fluid locomotion system that gives you full control over yourself with absolute comfort.
So fluid locomotion, getting around, moving around VR, it's a problem that game developers have been tackling and trying to solve. Everyone's doing it a little differently. The game moves fast here. How did you guys come upon the current system? Can you describe the mechanic and how people actually get around?
Sure, so just to describe it real quickly, it's very hands-driven. So what you do is you hold down trigger, you swing your arm, on the way down you release, that releases a little impulse out of your hand that sends you flying. We came upon this looking at a bunch of different systems. I mean, there are arm swingers out there that are very gesture-based. There's straight air grab systems. The fluid locomotion system is not really any of those, but it takes into all those ideas into account. We have a lot of things built into it. The reason it's called fluid locomotion is because not only can you go from sprinting, you can also jump, and then you can go into flying, and then you can also climb. So at any point you go between these states. There's actually a lot of depth on display, not enough that we could tell all of it in a 5-minute demo, but it's something that you could definitely get mastery of.
And you guys designed a game where it's a racing game, you're moving linearly forward essentially, even though there is some left and right movement. Yeah. Does that accommodate then the type of movement system that you guys designed?
So we have a very forward bias in Sprint Vector because you want to get going fast. And actually it's very interesting. That was one of the biggest problems we had was trying to get this intended motion. That is essentially people run in very different ways. They go like this, they do like a crisscross, and unfortunately doing a crisscross is not a straight line if you're trying to track the hands. So using intended motion, we kind of take all this information down, boil it so you're going straight. That being said, level design here on display is very linear with a couple of deviations, shortcuts, different paths. Going into the future, we're going to experiment with very branching, very like traditional racetrack-like situations.
You developed the game for the HTC Vive, it's room scale. Turning is all done on the user. The user has to turn, the user has to physically strafe left and right. Are those movements that you don't want the user to be doing with controllers in game?
You can totally be doing it. So actually, that's one of the things that we don't go over is that you can, in the middle of a run, swipe your hand and you'll go into a strafe. That being said, we are currently showing on the Vive, but Servios' entire position is we are platform agnostic. This is a motion controller game. It can work on anything. We just happen to be showing on the Vive for this setup.
In terms of comfort, what are the restrictions you place on yourselves for acceleration, for how fast you can move to make it comfortable for a wide number of users? So,
from the get-go, the system was already just the way we had designed it because the user has full control and there's this expectation set out of skating. It already started fairly comfortable. And what we did is we went in, we tuned all these values, specific easing, a lot of under the hood kind of stuff, until we got to a place where even the act of moving from one climbing node to another, there's a nice transition that does not cause discomfort, even though it is technically moving your camera.
Yeah, lateral movement in climbing. We've seen a lot of games like Climby or even Lone Echo on the Oculus side where as long as you have one-to-one movement, then you're good. But those games, some of the games, gravity is not there. So your brain has a logical expectation of G-forces and Newtonian motion. Here you have acceleration.
Yes. So it's heavy acceleration focused in Sprint Vector. The fluid locomotion system is actually flexible enough that it could be done in a different way. This is just specifically tuned for Sprint Vector because we wanted to give the most extreme example and really show that, you know, all these rules that everyone set up in VR, you know, maybe they're not the right thing. Maybe we can go a different way. Maybe we can make something that's incredibly exhilarating and it really gets your adrenaline going. Yeah.
In terms of level design, how wide-ranging have you guys experimented with? How much actual left and right turning can you build into a game like this?
So internally we have a bunch of prototype levels that, you know, they were actually nothing like this. We were just kind of like, all right, we have this amazing way to move around the world, let's exploit it. And we had areas that was just like, there are ramps in the sky that are tilted and you're jumping from one to another and you really have to use the air control to get between them. Obviously, we're not doing that for a first public release. That being said, going into the future, the level design is going to be very exploitative of the locomotion system. The better understanding you have over the system, the better mastery, the better you're going to be at Sprint Vector. And the other half of it is going to be when you understand the level design, you understand all those shortcuts, you understand what it takes to shave down 2 seconds from your time, that's how you're going to get really good.
And multiplayer is a big focus of this game. You guys are showing 2-player multiplayer. What are the limits of, is it 2 players max for this?
So we're showing 2 players right now just because it's more convenient. We definitely want to do more than 2 players going forward. It's actually very fun to just race yourself in your own time. A lot of people at this convention have been coming back just to beat their own time. That being said, a multiplayer competitive race is intense, as I'm sure you guys just realized. It can get exhilarating just running past each other and trying to catch up, and it really forces you to exert even more to get more out of the locomotion.
What are the limits? Where do you find people get the most sick, either in their stride or what their expectations and how they misalign with what they see in the game?
So Well, let me preface it. This is a very early version. It is not perfect by any means. We're going to keep tuning in until it is as perfect as we can get it. I find that when people freak out and they stop controlling themselves and they're just kind of left to the momentum, that's probably when they have the worst experience. The reason for that is the faster you're going, the more control you're putting in, the better your experience is in general. Not only do you move quicker, you turn faster, you also don't really experience any of this leftover momentum because you are truly in control.
Have you guys experimented with hip tracking and putting a lot of people in studying how people actually move? Yes, a lot of it in their gait is in the hands, obviously the legs, but there's limitations on how much you can move. But the hips also play an important part in movement. Have you guys experimented with that?
So I know there are the Vive trackers that just released. We haven't yet been experimenting with that stuff. I am very eager to take a look at that stuff. Honestly, the very first thing I want to do is just put it on my feet and kick something. So we'll see how that works out with Sprint Vector. Sprint Vector is designed fully with the motion controllers. Everything's kind of built into that system. And the reason it kind of benefits that is that it allows you to fluidly switch between everything because it's the same set. It's your hands that are doing all these motions.
Okay, so Sprint Vector.
Yeah.
So how
raced.
did you feel? We did. I won the race.
Why do you have to jump into that? Yes, you won the
true.
race.
How did you feel physically after playing the demo?
I have to be honest with you. This was the first demo of the day at GDC. We saw a lot of VR that day, and it was probably the most motion sick that I got that day, which is not to say that I had to sit down, but I did have to have a glass of water, and I didn't feel good for a good hour or two afterwards. Now, I wouldn't say that it's terrible, but it definitely pushes the limits. And I think that's great. I can be objective enough to realize that we have to keep pushing these limits and finding out what works for people and what doesn't. And there is definitely a huge contingent of VR users that want the most intense experience possible, and I'm glad somebody is catering to that.
I mean, they combined 4 different locomotion mechanics, and actually, if you count them, it's 5. Right. So one is the most basic sprinting motion. Let's just evaluate how each of them did.
Yeah.
So the sprinting motion, you're holding the controllers out, and based on your linear movement, almost as if you're holding the tips of ski poles, you were skating forward.
It felt more like skiing to me too, because you also press the button down while you pull back, release, and do it again. So it's like you're digging into the ground.
And the pace at which you move your hands, the cadence at which you glide, which I gotta say, it must be correlated with maybe your height. I'm assuming that determined how fast, how much acceleration.
Man, I was going as fast as I possibly could physically, and it turned out I didn't have to do that because I watched an employee do it after I did it. Maybe she was moving half as fast as me physically, but just killing it. Just zooming through the game so fast that she just had to take the headset off and wait for her opponent to catch up.
Wow.
So there's definitely a sweet spot. And I asked the developer afterwards, is there any indication in-game about what that ideal cadence is? And I'm hoping that they implement that.
Right, and even with the cadence, there must be a cap to your top speed or the max acceleration.
Right.
It doesn't make sense that if you kept on having a perfect stride, you would keep accelerating because there would have to be a limit. Or else you'd just be really uncomfortable. You'd be an infinite acceleration. Now, I thought it actually worked well as well. The second form of moving was jumping, and this was similar. You held the button down, in this case, the touchpad, and then kind of launch yourself in the air. By pushing down, you could have a double jump. And this felt like a version of climbing, except you weren't grabbing any physical objects. You weren't seeing anything in front of you. You were just in space, pressing the thumbstick down, and then pushing down, and you would launch yourself.
Yeah, I felt like this was the mechanic that could have used the most work because I didn't get it for about half the time I was in there. I kept trying to jump and it just wouldn't jump. And it turned out that I was doing it too late once I'd already gotten to the edge of the platform I wanted to jump from. Turned out currently in the build, you have to use your last dig as the jump, and it uses your current speed as a multiplier for that jump.
Got it.
So I think maybe a Tony Hawk method where just like releasing is an auto jump, or just the easiest thing to do would be a tap is jump.
You don't like the physical motion being tied to...
I like it being tied to your current momentum.
Okay.
I don't know if that is necessarily what I need for it.
Because it conflicts with the stride movement.
Maybe
and
so.
And they're very similar. One is moving like this, and one is moving like that.
The problem is I want to jump right at a certain moment and right when I hit the edge of a hill.
Right.
And so that's more of like a timing exercise to me. And maybe I just need more practice. If the developers think it's right, I trust them and I'll try to master it. But that was my impression.
Now, the third form of movement was climbing. I thought felt the most natural. You would reach a barrier, there would be nodes, and just like in Lone Echo or in Climbing or the Climb, you would grab the nodes and propel yourself. Now, the difference here is that there is gravity, and you're not just propelling yourself and flying indefinitely. You are propelling yourself. How fast you pull down is how far you'd launch, and then you'd land.
So it is like the Climb in that respect, but there's less gravity than the Climb.
Yeah.
Either that or you're much more powerful.
Right. I think that's how I read it, as you are super strong.
And that I enjoyed very much, because there's that one-to-one movement where you're grabbing the wall and you just fling yourself down, and then you have to time your grab with the next green element. That was a lot of fun. I got that right away, and I was flying up the wall, and that was very intuitive. I think that works really well. The flying, however, that gets back to the jumping, where I wasn't nailing that. In fact, first, my arms were even in the right direction. Because the way it works is when you launch into the air, you can put your arms out in front of you to activate a kind of Superman mode, where you don't get infinite momentum push, but you do get additional push forward. I did this because that's what Superman does, right? You have to put your arms out in front of you like this, and it also multiplies how fast you're currently going. And I think I was never going quite fast enough to really make use of that.
Yeah, for me, it almost felt like swimming, where you can be doing a freestyle swim, and at some point, if you're swimming, you can glide by putting your hands out in front of you. That's how I interpret it, and that's how I think it was best used.
Yeah, I did do it a couple times, and it felt great. Once I got it figured out, it actually felt really, really fun.
Now, the fifth locomotion mechanic isn't explicit, but it's your physical body, because it was in room scale. And the map was designed, it's a race, the course was designed where you had to physically duck and move left and right to avoid obstacles. And I found that I was most comfortable when I planted my feet, when I was doing my stride, doing my skating, doing my climbing, doing my jumping, doing my gliding, while my feet were planted. But once I started to have to combine that with shuffling left and right and physically strafing, that's when I felt like I could lose my balance.
Well, he told you about that extra move that they didn't tell us about, where you can actually, strafe side to side while still facing forward.
Yeah.
It's a game where you actually move in the direction that you're looking. So you're right. All you have to do is turn your head and continue to ski in order to change your direction. But I played the whole game facing forward too. I wouldn't describe it as room scale because I'm not moving my feet ever. But it definitely does take advantage of your whole body. And like you said, you definitely have to. When I jump, I actually was jumping, and when I was ducking under things.
I had a lot of fun playing this early prototype of Sprint Vector. Like you said, I'm glad they're pushing the limits of locomotion and moving at high speeds, and can prove that you can have a fun multiplayer competitive game where you're having your players accelerate at pretty insane speeds.
And this is a competitive game. I mean, I was really, I needed that drink of water afterwards. And there's been some news stories recently about people actually going on a VR diet where they actually use it as a form of exercise.
All right.
And I can actually see, honestly, if people were to spend an hour playing this game a day, you're losing some weight.
So Sprint Vector, it's coming out from Survios later this year. I can't wait to actually play that when that comes out for
I want
HTC
a
Vive.
rematch.
We'll get that rematch later. But until then, this.
Oh, double crossbows. Fuck yeah.
The John Woo of crossbows, Norm. Are you recording this, Norm?
I am.
All right.
Oh no, I dropped one. I'm in the ground.
Oh,
Come on, show me your back. Show me your back.
Dina says I'm being too loud.
Go for the kill shot. Guns, crossbows akimbo.
What?
Okay, you got the fireball, guys. That's good.
Where's
Will, put your hand to the
Okay,
ground.
hang on.
I can't put my hand to the ground because the ground is the... Just the tip, Kishore.
Oh, I saw your hand. Hang on, I lost tracking for a second.
Oh my god.
Oh god, I'm down.
I'm down.
Get out of there, get out of there.
Gotcha. Oh no.
Oh my, we were so close.
Well, our spotlight this week is a game that was actually released at GDC Week, and it's Robo Recall.
Yeah, a game that's free to anyone who buys the Oculus Touch. And what a game. It's like really high quality.
It is great. It's a fantastic move by Oculus to give this game for free to Touch users, because it is really their first single-player Touch-enabled game that knocks it out of the park in terms of production values. Now,
a lot of people are calling this maybe potentially the killer app for Touch, and I think it definitely is on the high end. It's a satisfying game. So it's made by Epic Games, the makers of the Unreal Engine and the Unreal series, and it's the iteration, the culmination of their experimentation with what was it?
Bullet Train?
Bullet Train,
yeah.
their shooter experiment, and it's a game that's split into 9 different levels. Very arcade-based.
Yeah, very much so.
And the replayability in the game is just getting the high score.
Against your friends and yourself.
Yeah, the creative ways in which you can kill the robots.
That's right, yeah. And speaking of locomotion, it has an interesting solution to the lack of 360 on the Oculus Touch. You will teleport by moving either analog stick in any direction, but then once you push it forward, then you rotate it to dictate which direction you'll face when you come out. And there's an arrow that will indicate that. It takes some getting used to, but I've gotten used to it. Do you find that it's intuitive?
I love it. I think it's not only intuitive, I think it actually helps make the game more fun. Because if it was a game where I was teleporting and then physically turning to shoot the robot, I like the fact that I can reorient myself before I teleport, so that the robot is right in front of me, and I can shoot the side of its head or grab its arm, and it feels very stylized in that way. I feel more like an action hero doing that.
I like it too, and when you come out of your teleport, the whole world enters a bullet time, so you really feel quite powerful. There are people who would disagree with us, though. There are people who want that. Not only do they want just that 360 movement, and by the way, the Touch will let you do that if you have a 3-sensor setup. If you only have 2, it actually tells you have to keep facing forward if you try to do that. There are some people who would disagree with us on that. There's a modding community that have already changed this game so that you can have free movement through it, so that you can walk and it breaks the teleportation completely.
Can you play the game that way?
Yes, you can.
Wow.
Do the designers want you to?
Maybe not.
Probably not. And this gets into that whole game design discussion where you have to realize that the games are designed with certain limitations that are there to balance out the feedback that the game gives you and the power that you have inside of it.
Because the game encourages change in elevation. It encourages you to teleport above the bus stations, on top of cars, on top of rooftops even. And if it was one-to-one room scale, there would be no way for you to actually physically get to those places.
No, the mod doesn't disable the teleportation. You can still do that, and of course that's how you have to change height when you teleport on top of things. But these mods do let you walk freely through the world. And from what I've read, it makes it easier to play in some respects. But it's cool that they allow for these mods to exist. It's just interesting though to think of it from a game design standpoint.
Which is a very good point, because there are a lot of instances where, as gamers, we want to feel like we want to have all the options available to us. Play it the way we want to play it. 360, standing forward, one-to-one movement, or teleport, or snap movement. But from a game design standpoint, this game is clearly designed so that you can teleport far distances, immediately have verticality to the game, and that is designed so that you can boost your points, because it's a score-based game. And I don't think you would have the same amount of satisfaction playing it the other way necessarily.
Yeah, you bring up an interesting point, I think, which is I wonder if your scores even go on the leaderboard if you use any of these mods, or if it disables that. I wonder. Anyway, I think that the locomotion technique is solid, and it makes me feel powerful enough moving it to any place in the world as well as any direction. I actually think it's quite an intense game, and it hits that line for me of motion sickness, but I can still play it for quite a while without feeling anything. But it certainly is a game there's so much teleportation and so many things happening. I'm grabbing bullets out of bullet time and I'm throwing them back, and I'm getting a guy with a shotgun here, and I'm hearing somebody behind me and then teleporting before somebody gets me. It's very frantic. There's quite a lot going on in the game.
And I really have to commend Epic on the polish in this game, on the mechanical polish. Not just that the game looks beautiful and it's a beautiful cityscape that you're in, but the feeling of reloading, of the shotgun, all the animations feel very, very satisfying.
Absolutely, and there's all the upgrades that you can unlock along the way too. So I think that adds to the replayability factor. They did a good job. It may not be a 40-hour game, but it has replayability, and it's a polished, great experience. It's gotten great reviews. So thanks to Oculus for making that happen for free for everybody.
And of course, if you have the HTC Vive and you have Revive installed, you can actually get into the Oculus Store and pay $30 for it.
I didn't know that. So that's interesting. That's almost like Oculus's solution for Revive, because it doesn't cost $30 to anyone who owns the touch controllers.
The way they enabled it is the game is unlock free for you when you pair with your touch controllers.
Interesting. That's very cool, actually, because they have said publicly that they're even fixing some audio bugs in Revive. So I'm glad that there's a sense of inclusion. This is good for everybody.
Awesome. Well, that's it for this episode of Projections. We have plenty of more interviews and things we saw at GDC, which you'll see in future episodes. But until then, Jeremy and I will see you next time.